The moment Morgan Taylor saw her ex-husband Brandon walk through the crystal revolving doors of the Meridian Grand Hotel, she felt her breath catch in her throat. Not from love. Not from longing. But from the sweet, sharp taste of justice that was about to unfold. She stood near the marble concierge desk, her tailored navy suit perfectly pressed, her natural hair styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders. 7 years had transformed her from the broken woman Brandon had abandoned into something else entirely. Something powerful. Something he clearly didn't recognize. Reservation for Sterling, Brandon announced at the front desk, his voice carrying that same arrogant tone Morgan remembered too well. Brandon Sterling. We booked the presidential suite for the weekend. The young clerk, Emmanuel, glanced nervously toward Morgan. She gave the slightest shake of her head. Not yet. Of course, Mr. Sterling, Emmanuel said smoothly. We have you confirmed for 3 nights. Will anyone be joining you? My wife, my mother, my brother, and my sister, Brandon replied, turning to gesture at the group behind him. We're here for a family reunion. I expect your best service. My assistant said this place was top tier. Morgan's eyes moved to the woman standing beside Brandon. Simone. Younger than Morgan by at least 5 years, with expensive highlights and designer clothes that screamed new money. This was the woman Brandon had left her for? No. Morgan corrected herself. This was the woman who came after. Brandon had left Morgan for nothing but his own selfishness and his family's poison in his ear. Then she saw her. Patricia Sterling. Brandon's mother. The woman who had looked Morgan in her eyes 7 years ago and said, "You're not good enough for my son. You're just a maid with delusions." Patricia's eyes swept the lobby with the critical gaze of someone looking for flaws. Her fur-trimmed coat was too much for the mild weather, but Morgan knew it was about making a statement. Everything with Patricia was about statements. Brandon, darling, tell them we'll need extra towels, Patricia said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. You know how these boutique hotels can be. They never have enough amenities. Morgan felt her assistant, Bethany, appear beside her. Bethany was a beautiful woman with warm brown skin and an MBA from Stanford. She'd been with Morgan since the beginning. Should I handle this now? Bethany whispered. No, Morgan said quietly. Let them settle in first. Let them feel comfortable. Let them believe there's somewhere they matter. Brandon's younger brother, Craig, was taking selfies in front of the modern art installation in the lobby. His sister, Nicole, was already complaining about the room not being ready, though they'd arrived 2 hours before check-in time. Excuse me, Patricia suddenly called out, her sharp voice cutting through the elegant lobby. She was looking directly at Morgan. You there? Yes, you with the hair. Could you help with our luggage? The bellhop seems to be taking forever. Morgan felt every muscle in her body tense. 7 years ago, those words would have broken her. 7 years ago, she had been just the help to these people. She'd cleaned homes, scrubbed toilets, and worked herself to exhaustion while pregnant, trying to build something better. And Brandon's family had mocked her every single day. Emmanuel looked panicked. The other staff members nearby froze. Everyone who worked at the Meridian knew who Morgan Taylor was. Everyone except the Sterling family. Morgan walked forward slowly, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor. She stopped about 10 feet from Patricia, maintaining perfect professional distance. I'm afraid I'm not available to assist with luggage, Morgan said, her voice calm and level. However, our bellhop will be with you momentarily. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Do you know who we are? My son's assistant specifically requested VIP treatment. If you're unable to help, perhaps you should find another line of work. Morgan felt Bethany tense beside her. She also noticed Emmanuel reaching for the phone at the desk. She gave another small shake of her head. I'll make sure you receive exactly what you deserve, Morgan said, letting the words hang in the air with their double meaning. Brandon finally looked up from signing the check-in documents. His eyes passed over Morgan without a flicker of recognition. She'd changed that much. Or perhaps he'd never truly seen her at all. Mom, leave the staff alone, Brandon said, but there was no real conviction in his voice. Let's just get to the room. I'm simply ensuring we receive the service we paid for, Patricia huffed. This is supposed to be a 5-star establishment. It is, Morgan said. And we pride ourselves on treating every guest according to their true character. Patricia looked confused by the comment, but Brandon was already heading toward the elevators, Simone clinging to his arm. Nicole and Craig followed, Craig still on his phone, probably posting about the hotel without realizing the irony. Unbelievable, Patricia muttered as she passed Morgan. The entitlement of service workers these days. When the elevator doors closed behind the Sterling family, the lobby seemed to exhale collectively. Emmanuel looked at Morgan with wide eyes. "Miss Taylor, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to." Morgan raised her hand. "You did perfectly, Emmanuel. You were professional and courteous, exactly as we train. But she called you." "I know what she called me," Morgan said. "I've been called worse by better people." She turned to Bethany. "How long before they realize their keycards are standard access, not VIP? I had IT downgrade them the moment they checked in," Bethany said with a slight smile. "They'll notice when they try to access the executive lounge or the rooftop pool. Those areas require premium keycards." "Perfect," Morgan said. "Let them enjoy their evening. Tomorrow morning we'll have a conversation." "Are you sure you want to wait?" Bethany asked. "You could go up there right now and—" "Revenge is a dish best served cold," Morgan said. "But humiliation is best served when they're comfortable, when they think they've won, when they believe they're safe." She looked at her watch. "They have about 14 hours before they realize who really holds the power here." As Morgan walked back toward her private office, she caught her reflection in one of the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows. She barely recognized herself from 7 years ago. That Morgan had been scared, pregnant, and penniless. This Morgan owned 17 hotels across the country, employed over 3,000 people, and had a net worth that would make Brandon's construction business look like a lemonade stand. But it wasn't the money that made her smile. It wasn't the success or the power or the empire she'd built from nothing. It was the fact that Patricia Sterling had looked her dead in the eye and hadn't recognized her. Because to people like Patricia, people who cleaned for a living were invisible, interchangeable, beneath notice. Tomorrow Morgan would make sure she was impossible to ignore. She sat down at her desk, the city lights twinkling through the windows of her corner office. Bethany brought her usual evening tea, and Morgan pulled up the security camera feeds on her computer. She could see Brandon and his family in the presidential suite, spreading out, touching everything, acting like they owned the place. "You know," Bethany said, settling into the chair across from Morgan's desk, "when you told me this might happen someday, I didn't believe you. I thought, what are the odds that your ex-husband's family would randomly book a hotel that you own?" "Not random," Morgan said. "Brandon's assistant follows luxury travel influencers. 3 of them posted about the Meridian Grand last month. I may have paid for those posts." Bethany's eyes widened. "You planned this?" "I prepared for this," Morgan corrected. "There's a difference. I've spent 7 years building something real. They never showed up, fine. I'd still have my hotels, my dignity, and my peace. But if they did show up," she smiled, "well, then they'd learn a valuable lesson about underestimating people." Through the camera feed, Morgan watched Patricia complaining to Brandon about something. Simone was taking photos of the suite for social media. Craig was raiding the minibar. Nicole was on her phone, probably already complaining to someone about something. They looked so comfortable, so entitled, so completely unaware that the floor was about to drop out from under them. Morgan picked up her phone and scrolled to a photo from 7 years ago. It was one of the last pictures she'd taken before Brandon left her. She was 6 months pregnant, standing in front of her tiny cleaning van, smiling despite everything because she'd just landed a contract with a small hotel chain to clean their rooms. That contract had changed her life. Not because it made her rich, it barely kept her afloat, but because it taught her the hotel business from the inside out. She learned what guests wanted, what staff needed, what managers overlooked. She learned that most hotel owners treated their cleaning staff like machines instead of humans. So when she built her own hotel chain, she did it differently. She paid above industry standard. She provided health insurance and childcare stipends. She promoted from within. She remembered everyone's name. And that's why her hotels thrived when others struggled. That's why the Meridian name meant something. That's why travel magazines called her properties the gold standard of hospitality. Not because she had the fanciest lobbies or the most expensive sheets, but because she treated people like they mattered. Something Patricia Sterling had never learned to do. Morgan closed the photo and set her phone down. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tomorrow would be justice. But tonight, she'd let them sleep peacefully in their expensive suite, completely unaware that the woman they destroyed had risen from those ashes and built an empire. And the best part? She'd done it without them. Without Brandon's money. Without his family's connections. Without anything except her own determination and the kindness of people who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Morgan stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city she'd made her home. Somewhere out there, in 17 different cities, Her hotels stood as monuments to what people said she couldn't do. Tomorrow the Sterling family would learn that some women don't just survive. They thrive. They build. They win. And they never, ever forget. Morgan's daughter, Aria, had been 3 weeks old when Brandon walked out. That detail stuck with Morgan even now, sharp and clear as broken glass. 3 weeks. 21 days of motherhood, and he'd decided it was too hard, too inconvenient, too much of a deviation from the life his family had planned for him. She could still see him standing in the doorway of their cramped apartment, his lawyer-drafted divorce papers in hand. The papers that somehow gave him everything: the car they'd shared, the small savings account, even the furniture his mother had gifted them but apparently still owned. "Morgan, be reasonable," he'd said, as if she were the one being unreasonable. As if she hadn't just given birth. As if she wasn't still healing, still exhausted, still trying to figure out how to keep a tiny human alive. "You can't expect me to stay in this situation. My mother says." "Your mother?" Morgan had repeated, her voice hollow. "Always your mother." She'd been sitting on the couch, her cleaning company uniform still on because she'd squeezed in 2 house calls between feeding schedules. Her body ached. Her breasts hurt from nursing. She had exactly $472 in her personal checking account and a baby who needed everything. Patricia had appeared behind Brandon like a shadow. Of course she had. Patricia never missed an opportunity to twist the knife. "This is for the best," Patricia had said, stepping into the apartment without invitation. "Brandon needs to focus on his career. He can't be weighed down by..." She'd looked at baby Aria with such cold dismissal that Morgan's arms had instinctively tightened around her daughter. "By circumstances that will hold him back." Circumstances. Morgan had whispered. "You mean his daughter?" "I mean poor choices," Patricia had snapped. "My son married beneath himself and we all knew it. You with your little cleaning business and your big dreams. Dreams don't pay bills, Morgan. Brandon needs a partner who can move in his circles, who understands his world. I am his partner. I'm his wife." "Not for much longer," Patricia had said, and there'd been satisfaction in her voice. "Sign the papers. Brandon will provide minimal child support as required by law, but that's all you'll get. We've already ensured that your claims to any joint assets are nullified. You came into this marriage with nothing, and you'll leave with nothing." Brandon hadn't even looked ashamed. He just stood there, letting his mother speak for him, like he'd done their entire marriage. "Brandon," Morgan had said, trying one last time to reach the man she'd thought she'd loved. "Look at your daughter. Look at her. How can you just leave?" He'd glanced at Aria, but his eyes had been empty. "I'm 26, Morgan. I'm not ready to be a father. I'm not ready for this life. My mother's right, I made a mistake." And that word mistake had shattered something fundamental inside Morgan. Her daughter wasn't a mistake. Her love hadn't been a mistake. But Brandon's weakness, his inability to stand up to his mother, his complete lack of spine? That had been the real mistake. Morgan had signed the papers because she had no choice. She couldn't afford a lawyer. She couldn't fight people with money and connections and time. She just signed her name, her hand shaking, while tears dripped onto the paper and smudged the ink. Patricia had smiled. Actually smiled. "You'll find someone more appropriate to your station eventually. Maybe another janitor." Then they'd left. Brandon had taken his clothes, his laptop, and the television. He hadn't even asked to hold his daughter goodbye. He just walked out, and the door closing behind him had sounded like a gunshot in the silent apartment. Morgan had sat there for hours, holding Aria, trying to figure out how she was going to survive. The rent was due in a week. She had formula to buy, diapers, a car payment she couldn't make without Brandon's income. Her cleaning business brought in maybe $800 a week on a good week, and she'd have to find childcare if she wanted to keep working. The math didn't work. No matter how she calculated it, the numbers didn't add up to survival. That night, she'd called her Aunt Ruth her only living family. Ruth lived 3 states away and had her own struggles, but she'd always been kind to Morgan. Ruth had wired her $500 and said, "Baby girl, I wish I had more. But you're stronger than you know. Don't let those people break you." Morgan had cried for the first time since Brandon left. Really cried. The kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and desperate. Then she'd looked at Aria, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, and she'd made a decision. She wouldn't just survive. She'd become someone Patricia Sterling couldn't dismiss. Someone Brandon would regret losing. Not for revenge, at least, that's what she told herself, but for proof that she was more than they'd said she was. The next morning, she dropped Aria off at a discount daycare that accepted payment plans. She'd gone to her scheduled cleaning job at the Riverside Inn, a modest hotel on the outskirts of the city. The owner, an older woman named Dorothy Chin, had noticed Morgan's red eyes immediately. "Rough night?" Dorothy had asked, not unkindly. Morgan had almost lied. Almost said she was fine. But something in Dorothy's face, some genuine concern, had opened the floodgates. "My husband left me 3 weeks after our daughter was born. His family." Morgan's voice had cracked. "They said I wasn't good enough. That I'm just a maid with delusions." Dorothy had been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said something Morgan would never forget. "I started as a maid. 23 years ago, I cleaned toilets at this very hotel. Now I own it. You know why? Because I paid attention. I learned the business from the ground up. And I never let anyone tell me what I was worth." "How?" Morgan had asked desperately. "How do I go from cleaning rooms to owning them?" Dorothy had poured them both coffee and sat Morgan down in the hotel's small office. For the next 2 hours, she'd explained the hotel industry. Occupancy rates, profit margins, customer service metrics, staff retention strategies. She'd shown Morgan her books, her business model, her failures and successes. "You want my advice?" Dorothy had finally said. "Keep cleaning. But while you clean, observe everything. Watch how the front desk operates. Notice what guests complain about. See where money gets wasted. Study the business like you're getting a degree in it, because you are. And when you're ready, I'll help you take the next step." Morgan had gone home that night with a notebook and a spark of hope. She'd started writing down everything she noticed. Room 212 had a broken air conditioning vent that made noise. Guests checked out early because of it. The front desk staff scheduled shifts poorly, creating gaps in service during peak hours. The hotel restaurant used expensive ingredients but had a limited menu, leading to waste. For 3 years, Morgan had cleaned hotels by day and studied business at community college at night. She'd worked herself to exhaustion, fueled by Aria's smiles and Dorothy's mentorship. She'd learned accounting, marketing, hospitality management. She'd saved every penny beyond basic survival. Brandon had sent exactly $300 a month in child support, the bare minimum the court required. He'd never called, never visited, never acknowledged Aria's existence beyond the mandatory payment. Patricia had sent a card on Aria's first birthday with a $20 bill inside and a note that said, "For the child. May she have more sense than her mother." Morgan had burned that card and used the $20 to buy Aria a stuffed elephant that her daughter still slept with. By year 4, Morgan had her associate's degree and enough saved to make a proposal. Dorothy had been impressed by Morgan's business plan for modernizing the Riverside Inn. They'd implemented Morgan's ideas: better online booking, upgraded rooms, a partnership with local businesses for guest experiences, and revenue had increased by 32% in 8 months. "You're ready?" Dorothy had said. "There's an investor meeting next month. Small hotel properties looking for new management and fresh ideas. Come with me." That meeting had changed everything. Morgan had presented her vision: hotels that prioritized staff welfare, believing that happy employees created happy guests. She'd shown data, case studies, and projections. Most investors had been polite but dismissive. Then Gerald Robertson had approached her. He was an older black man who'd made his fortune in tech and wanted to invest in hospitality. "I like your fire," he'd said. "And I like your numbers. But more than that, I like that you've been where your future employees will be. You know their struggles. That's worth more than any MBA." Gerald had backed her first hotel, a rundown property that needed total renovation. Morgan had worked alongside the construction crew, designing every detail with both luxury and practicality in mind. She'd hired staff from cleaning services, giving them better pay and training them for front desk and management positions. She'd created a daycare program for employees with children. The Meridian Inn had opened 6 months later, and within a year, it had 4.8 stars on every travel site and was booked solid 3 months in advance. Morgan had opened a second hotel. Then a third. Then investors who dismissed her initially were calling her. She'd negotiated hard, retaining majority ownership and complete creative control. By year 6 she had 10 hotels. By year 7, 17, with 3 more in development. Aria had grown up in hotel lobbies, doing homework at concierge desks, playing in employee lounges. The staff adored her. She knew every person's name and asked about their families. She was polite, humble, and kind, everything Patricia Sterling had implied Morgan couldn't teach her. Morgan had built an empire not with her ex-husband's money or connections, but despite their absence. She'd done it while raising a daughter alone. She'd done it while people like Patricia Sterling had assumed she'd fail, disappear, become another statistic of single motherhood and poverty. And now, 7 years later, those people were sleeping in one of her hotels, completely oblivious to the fact that the maid with delusions had become the owner of one of the fastest-growing luxury hotel chains in the country. Tomorrow morning, when they woke up in that presidential suite, everything would change. But tonight, Morgan sat in her apartment, a beautiful penthouse she'd purchased 2 years ago, and held her sleeping 7-year-old daughter. Arya had Brandon's eyes, but she had Morgan's spirit. She was brave and curious and confident in ways Morgan had never been at that age. "I'm going to make sure you never feel small," Morgan whispered to her sleeping child. "I'm going to show you what it means to fight for yourself. To build something real. To never let anyone tell you what you're worth." Arya stirred, mumbling something in her sleep about elephants and hotels. Morgan smiled. Tomorrow would be difficult. Facing Brandon and Patricia would bring up old wounds. But it would also close a chapter that had been open too long. Because Morgan Taylor wasn't the broken woman they'd discarded. She was the phoenix that had risen from those ashes. And tomorrow the Sterling family would learn that some people don't just bounce back from rejection. They soar. The transformation from cleaning lady to hotel magnate hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't happened easily. Morgan's journey had been paved with sleepless nights, self-doubt, and moments when giving up seemed like the only logical option. But logic had never been Morgan's strongest suit when it came to dreams. After Dorothy's initial mentorship, Morgan had thrown herself into learning everything about the hospitality industry. She'd taken online courses from Cornell School of Hotel Administration during Aria's nap times. She'd read every book she could find about hotel management, customer service, and business development. She'd networked at local business events, often the only woman of color in rooms full of investors who looked right through her. The turning point had come during a hospitality conference in Chicago when Morgan was 28. She'd scraped together money for the ticket and a cheap hotel room, leaving Arya with Ruth for 3 days. Morgan had attended every panel, taken notes until her hand cramped, and pushed through her imposter syndrome every time someone asked, "And which hotel do you work for?" "I'm building my own," she'd learned to say confidently, even when her bank account said otherwise. Gerald Robertson had been the keynote speaker that weekend. He talked about innovation in hospitality, about creating experiences instead of just providing rooms. But what caught Morgan's attention was his emphasis on social responsibility in business, treating employees fairly, investing in communities, building sustainable practices. During the networking reception, Morgan had worked up the courage to approach him. Her hands had been shaking as she'd extended her business card, a simple card she'd printed at the library, listing her name and the cleaning service she still operated. "Mr. Robertson, my name is Morgan Taylor. I clean hotels for a living, but I'm going to own them someday. I have a business plan that I think would interest you." Most people would have dismissed her. Gerald Robertson had looked at her card, then at her face, and said, "I have 5 minutes before my next meeting. Pitch me." Morgan had delivered the best 5 minutes of her life. She talked about employee retention, about how hotels lose millions in turnover costs because they treat staff poorly. She'd explained how investing in employee welfare wasn't just ethical, it was profitable. Happy employees stayed longer, performed better, and created better guest experiences. "And you've tested this theory?" Gerald had asked. "At the Riverside Inn where I work. I presented ideas to the owner, and she let me implement them in a limited capacity. Employee turnover dropped 40%. Guest satisfaction scores increased. Revenue went up over 30% in less than a year. All because we treated the cleaning staff like professionals instead of invisible workers." Gerald had pulled out his phone and handed it to her. "Put your real number in there. Not this cleaning service number. Your personal number. I'm going to call you next week, and we're going to talk seriously about funding your first property." Morgan had almost dropped his phone. "Are you serious?" "I made my money because people invested in me when I was just a kid with an idea and a laptop," Gerald had said. "I see that same hunger in you. Plus your numbers are solid. Let's see if we can turn this vision into reality." That phone call had come exactly 1 week later, and 3 months after that, Morgan had been signing papers for her first hotel property. It was a disaster when she'd bought it, a 40-room motel that hadn't been updated since 1987, with carpet that had probably been host to countless crimes and a reputation so bad that it showed up on worst hotels lists. But Morgan had seen potential. The location was perfect, just off a major highway with good visibility. The bones of the building were solid. And most importantly, she'd gotten it for a price that left room for complete renovation while still staying within Gerald's investment parameters. The renovation had taken 8 months. Morgan had been on site every single day, Arya often beside her in a playpen, or when she got older, helping by sorting paint samples. Morgan had worked alongside contractors, learning plumbing and electrical basics. She designed the rooms herself, going for a modern but warm aesthetic that felt welcoming rather than sterile. More importantly, she'd built the business model she'd promised. She'd hired staff from cleaning services and hospitality schools, paying them 20% above industry average. She'd provided health insurance from day one, including dental and vision. She'd created an on-site childcare program, knowing firsthand how impossible it was to work without reliable care for kids. "You're going to go broke," other hotel owners had told her. "You can't pay housekeepers that much and still make a profit." But Morgan had done her math. By paying well and treating staff with respect, her turnover was nearly zero. Training new employees was expensive, keeping good ones was profitable. Her staff took pride in their work because they felt valued. Rooms were cleaned better. Guest reviews mentioned the friendly, attentive staff. Word of mouth spread. The Meridian Inn had opened with a simple philosophy printed in the employee handbook. "We remember that hospitality starts with how we treat each other." By the end of the first year, the hotel had exceeded its revenue projections by 15%. By the second year, it was profitable enough that Morgan could start planning her second location. But success had brought new challenges. As Morgan's profile grew, so did scrutiny. She'd been featured in a local business journal, "Single Mother Builds Hotel Empire on Foundation of Fair Wages," and the article had caught Brandon's attention. He'd called her for the first time in 5 years. Not to apologize. Not to ask about Aria. But to suggest they reconnect, now that she was doing well for herself. "I always knew you had potential," Brandon had said on that phone call, his voice carrying false warmth. "Maybe we could meet for dinner? Talk about old times?" Morgan had laughed. Actually laughed. "Brandon, you left me when our daughter was 3 weeks old. You called her a mistake. Your mother called me a maid with delusions. Now that I own hotels instead of cleaning them, suddenly I'm worth your time? Morgan, don't be like that. I was young. I made mistakes. My mother? Well, you know how she is. But I've grown since then. I think we could." "No," Morgan had said simply. "We couldn't. Aria is 7 now. She doesn't know you, and that's by your choice. My success has nothing to do with you and never will. Lose this number." She'd blocked him immediately. But the call had reminded her that her success was becoming visible, and visibility meant vulnerability. She'd increased her security, protected her assets, and made sure her name was firmly established as the sole owner and founder of the Meridian hotel chain. Patricia had tried a different approach. She'd shown up at the Meridian Inn's lobby unannounced 6 months after that business journal article, dressed like she was attending a charity gala. "I'd like to speak with Morgan Taylor," Patricia had told the front desk staff. "Tell her Patricia Sterling is here. She'll know who I am." The staff had immediately recognized the name from Morgan's brief warnings. They'd called Morgan, who'd been reviewing blueprints for the 4th Meridian location, in her office. "Tell Mrs. Sterling I'm in a meeting," Morgan had said calmly, "and that I don't take walk-in appointments. She can reach out through the company website if she has a business inquiry." Patricia had waited for 30 minutes before leaving in a huff, telling anyone who would listen that some people forget where they came from. Morgan hadn't forgotten. She remembered every moment of where she came from. She remembered being poor, desperate, and dismissed. She remembered Patricia's cruel words and Brandon's weak betrayal. She remembered cleaning toilets while pregnant, working 3 jobs while nursing, studying for exams at 2 in the morning with a crying baby in her arms. She remembered all of it. And every memory fueled her determination to build something that could never be taken away. By the time Morgan opened her 10th hotel, she was being courted by major hospitality investment firms. She'd turned them all down, maintaining majority ownership and control. She'd hired Bethany as her COO, promoting her from general manager of the 3rd Meridian location. Together, they'd created a company culture that other hotels tried to copy but could never quite replicate because they didn't truly believe in it. Morgan had started a scholarship program for children of hospitality workers. She'd partnered with culinary schools to create paid internship programs. She'd implemented a policy where any employee could pitch ideas directly to management, and the best ideas earned bonuses and recognition. The Meridian name became synonymous with quality, not just for guests but for employees. People wanted to work for Morgan's hotels. They stayed for years, creating the kind of consistent service that money couldn't buy. And through it all, Morgan had raised Aria to be kind, curious, and compassionate. Aria volunteered at shelters on weekends. She tutored younger kids at her school. She understood that privilege came with responsibility, and that treating everyone with dignity wasn't optional. "Mom," Arya had asked one day when she was 7, sitting in Morgan's office while Morgan reviewed contracts, "why don't I have a dad like other kids?" Morgan had closed her laptop and given her daughter full attention. "You have a biological father, but he chose not to be in your life. That's his loss, not yours. You have me, Aunt Ruth, Uncle Gerald, Aunt Bethany, and about 3,000 hotel staff members who would do anything for you. That's more family than most people have." "Does he know about the hotels?" Arya had asked. "Does he know you're successful?" "Probably," Morgan had said honestly. "But his knowledge doesn't matter. I didn't build this for him. I built it for us. For you. To show you that when people count you out, you work harder and prove them wrong by living well." Now, sitting in her office the night before confronting Brandon's family, Morgan pulled up her company's financial reports. 17 hotels, generating over $200 million in annual revenue. 3,000 employees with industry-leading benefits and wages. A reputation that had taken 7 years to build, brick by brick, room by room, guest by guest. The little cleaning lady with delusions had become one of the most respected voices in hospitality. She'd been invited to speak at the same Cornell program she'd once taken online. Harvard Business School had done a case study on her employee retention strategies. Forbes had named her one of the top entrepreneurs to watch. And tomorrow, Patricia Sterling would finally understand what she'd underestimated. Not just Morgan's business acumen, not just her determination, but her absolute refusal to let people who'd broken her down define her ceiling. Morgan closed her laptop and looked at the framed photo on her desk. It showed her and Arya at the grand opening of the 10th Meridian Hotel, both of them wearing hard hats and holding shovels, grinning at the camera. Arya had been so proud that day, telling everyone, "My mom built this." Yes, Morgan thought. I did build this. Without them. Despite them. Because of my own strength and the help of people who actually believed in me. Tomorrow that lesson would be delivered in the most satisfying way possible. Not with anger or cruelty, but with the simple, undeniable truth of success. Some women break. Some women bend. And some women build empires. Morgan Taylor had built an empire. And it was time for the Sterling family to tour what they'd tried to destroy. Brandon Sterling had always believed in making an entrance. Even now, at 33, he carried himself with the same swagger that had first attracted Morgan a decade ago before she'd realized that confidence without substance was just arrogance wearing a nice suit. He'd been planning this trip for weeks. A family reunion weekend at the Meridian Grand Hotel, paid for by his construction company's expense account. He'd seen the Instagram posts from travel influencers raving about the property. 5-star accommodations, impeccable service, stunning views of the city skyline. It was exactly the kind of place where the Sterling family belonged. Or at least, that's what he kept telling himself as his business teetered on the edge of collapse. Nobody needed to know that 3 major contracts had fallen through this year. Nobody needed to know that Simone's expensive taste was bleeding him dry. Nobody needed to know that his mother's country club dues and his brother's gambling debts were eating into his savings. This weekend was about maintaining appearances. The Sterling family was successful. The Sterling family was important. The Sterling family deserved VIP treatment. As Brandon stepped out of the Uber with Simone on his arm, he took a moment to appreciate the hotel's facade. All glass and steel and modern elegance. His assistant, Rachel, had done well finding this place. "This is gorgeous," Simone said, already pulling out her phone to document their arrival. She was wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her designer bag carefully positioned for the camera angle. "My followers are going to die when they see where we're staying." Patricia emerged from the second Uber, her sharp eyes already scanning for problems. At 61, Brandon's mother still had the energy of a woman half her age, though all that energy was usually directed toward criticizing others and maintaining social status. "The lobby better be as nice as the website promised," Patricia said, adjusting her expensive scarf. "I won't tolerate false advertising." Craig and Nicole piled out of the third Uber, both of them on their phones, both of them looking vaguely annoyed to be present. Craig ran a series of failed business ventures funded by their parents. Nicole was between jobs, which she preferred to call exploring her options. "Can we just check in?" Nicole complained. "I need to shower." That Uber smelled weird. Brandon led his family through the revolving doors, and even he had to admit the lobby was impressive. High ceilings, modern art installations, a water feature that somehow didn't seem pretentious. The marble floors gleamed. Soft music played from hidden speakers. Staff members moved efficiently, greeting guests with genuine smiles. This was the kind of place that said you'd made it. This was the kind of place where the Sterling family belonged. Good afternoon, the young man at the front desk said warmly. His name tag read Emmanuel. Welcome to the Meridian Grand Hotel. Do you have a reservation? Brandon Sterling, Brandon said, sliding his credit card across the marble counter. We booked the presidential suite. I believe my assistant arranged for VIP accommodations? Emmanuel's smile didn't waver, but Brandon noticed the slightest pause. The clerk's eyes flickered toward someone off to the side, a woman in a navy suit who gave the tiniest shake of her head. Of course, Mr. Sterling. Let me pull up your reservation. Emmanuel's fingers flew across the keyboard. Yes, I have you here for 3 nights, presidential suite. Will anyone else be joining your party? Just my family, Brandon said, gesturing to the group behind him. My wife, mother, brother, and sister. We're expecting top-tier service. My assistant specifically mentioned VIP treatment when she booked. Absolutely, Emmanuel said smoothly. We're delighted to have you. I just need a credit card for incidentals and a signature here. Brandon signed the electronic pad, feeling satisfied. This was how things should be. His name carrying weight, his family treated with the respect they deserved. Will there be anything else? Emmanuel asked, handing over key cards. When's the concierge available? Patricia interjected, stepping forward. I'll need reservations at the best restaurant in the hotel for tonight. And I want to ensure our suite has been stocked with the premium amenities. My son paid for VIP and I expect VIP. Of course, Mrs. Sterling. Our concierge desk is just to your left, and they'll be happy to assist with any reservations or special requests. Patricia looked mollified, though Brandon knew she'd find something to complain about eventually. She always did. As Emmanuel handed over the key cards, Brandon noticed that woman in the navy suit again. She was standing near the concierge desk, talking quietly with another staff member. There was something familiar about her profile, something that tugged at his memory. But that was ridiculous. He didn't know anyone who worked at hotels. That was a world he'd left behind when he'd divorced Morgan. Morgan. He hadn't thought about her in months. Years really. She'd probably moved on, maybe found some blue-collar guy who didn't mind her past. She'd probably gone back to cleaning houses, raising that kid alone, struggling to make ends meet like he'd predicted. He'd seen that article about some single mother building hotels, but the woman in the photo hadn't looked anything like Morgan. That woman had been confident, polished, successful, everything Morgan had never been. Brandon, are you coming? Simone tugged at his arm, already heading toward the elevators. He shook off the odd feeling and followed his family, the key card heavy in his pocket. The elevator was sleek and modern, with a touch screen showing different floors and amenities. Patricia was already complaining about the lack of elevator attendants. In my day, proper hotels had staff to operate the elevators, she said. Everything's automated now. No personal touch. Mom, nobody has elevator attendants anymore, Craig said, not looking up from his phone. This isn't 1955. Don't talk back to your mother, Patricia snapped. Brandon tuned them out, watching the floor numbers climb. 20th floor. 21st. 22nd. The presidential suite was on the 25th floor with panoramic views of the city. When the elevator doors opened, Brandon felt his chest swell with pride. The hallway was elegant, with soft lighting and expensive artwork. Their suite was at the end, double doors that promised luxury beyond. He slid the key card, heard the satisfying click and pushed open the doors. Oh my God, Simone breathed. The presidential suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The living area was larger than Brandon's first apartment, with plush furniture, a full bar and a dining table that could seat 8. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases. A welcome basket sat on the coffee table, filled with local chocolates and a bottle of champagne. Now this is more like it, Patricia said, walking through the space like a queen inspecting her domain. Though I'll need to check the bedroom situation. I specifically requested separate quarters for myself. Nicole and Craig had already claimed the smaller bedrooms, leaving Brandon and Simone the master suite. The bathroom alone was bigger than Morgan's entire apartment had been. Wait, why was he thinking about Morgan again? Brandon pushed the thought away and focused on unpacking. Simone was already taking photos for Instagram, carefully staging shots of the suite. Patricia was calling the concierge to make her dinner demands. Craig was raiding the minibar. Nicole was complaining about the Wi-Fi password. This was his family. Loud, demanding, occasionally insufferable, but his. And this weekend was about celebrating the Sterling name, about showing the world they were still on top, Even if Brandon's business was struggling and Simone's shopping habits were drowning them in debt and his mother's social climbing was exhausting everyone around her, none of that mattered. What mattered was appearance. What mattered was maintaining the image. Down in the lobby, Morgan watched the security camera feed on Bethany's tablet. She could see Brandon and his family settling into the suite, spreading out like they owned the place. Simone taking her selfies. Patricia probably already finding things to criticize. Craig drinking expensive liquor he didn't pay for. Nicole leaving her clothes everywhere. They look comfortable, Bethany observed. Maybe too comfortable. Let them get comfortable, Morgan said. Let them believe this is what they deserve. Let them feel safe. You're scary when you're calm like this, Bethany said, but she was smiling. I'm not being cruel, Morgan said. I'm being strategic. They've spent 7 years believing they were right about me. Believing I failed, disappeared, became irrelevant. Let them enjoy one evening of that delusion. Tomorrow morning, reality arrives. Emmanuel approached them, looking relieved to be away from the front desk. Miss Taylor, I'm so sorry about earlier. When that woman Mrs. Sterling basically called you a servant, I wanted to say something, but you did exactly what you should have done, Morgan assured him. You remain professional. That's what we do here. We don't stoop to other people's level. We rise above it and let our standards speak for themselves. What time do you want me to notify them about the keycard changes? Emmanuel asked. 6 a.m., Morgan said. Right when they try to access the executive lounge for breakfast. They'll get an error message. They'll come downstairs confused and annoyed. That's when I'll introduce myself. This is going to be beautiful, Bethany said. In an absolutely devastating way. Morgan looked at the screen one more time. Brandon was standing at the window, looking out over the city with an expression she recognized. That was his I'm successful face. His I've made it face. His I'm important face. Except he hadn't made it. His construction business was struggling. She knew because she'd looked into it. She always kept tabs on things that might affect Arya, and Brandon's financial situation qualified. He was months behind on child support, though he didn't know she knew. He'd been shuffling money around, keeping up appearances while drowning in debt. She could destroy him financially if she wanted. Could call in lawyers, freeze his assets, demand every penny he owed. But that wasn't the kind of revenge Morgan wanted. She wanted something simpler, recognition. She wanted Brandon and his family to look at her and understand what they'd missed. What they'd underestimated. What they'd thrown away. She wanted them to realize that the woman they'd dismissed as worthless had built something they could only dream of. And tomorrow morning, that realization would arrive with the force of a freight train. Morgan handed the tablet back to Bethany. I'm going home. Arya has a dance recital rehearsal at 6 and I promised I'd be there. Can you handle things here tonight? Of course, Bethany said. Go be a mom. Let the Sterling family enjoy their last night of ignorant bliss. As Morgan walked out of the hotel, she passed through the lobby where Brandon and his family had stood just an hour earlier. She remembered Patricia's voice, dismissive and cruel. You there with the hair. Could you help with our luggage? Morgan smiled. Tomorrow, Patricia Sterling would learn the most important lesson of her life. Never underestimate the help. Because sometimes the help becomes your boss. And bosses have very long memories. Morning came too quickly for the Sterling family, though for entirely different reasons than they expected. Patricia had stayed up past midnight complaining to the hotel restaurant staff about the lack of gluten-free options, despite not actually being gluten intolerant. Craig had drunk his way through the minibar, racking up a bill he assumed Brandon would cover. Nicole had live-streamed herself in the suite, bragging to her followers about the luxury vacation she claimed to have paid for herself. And Brandon had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about quarterly projections that didn't project anything good. Simone had been the only one who actually slept, mostly because she'd taken a sleeping pill with her evening wine and passed out in an eye mask and silk bonnet, her phone still in her hand. When Brandon's alarm went off at 6 a.m., he groaned. But he'd promised Craig they'd hit the executive lounge for the complimentary breakfast before it got crowded. VIP perks, Craig had said. Gotta maximize what we're paying for. Except they weren't paying for VIP perks. Brandon had booked a standard suite and told his family it was VIP because he couldn't afford the actual upgrade. But they didn't need to know that. They just needed to believe the Sterling family still had status. Brandon showered quickly and dressed in his expensive casual wear designer jeans and a polo that cost more than it should. He met Craig in the hallway, his younger brother looking rough around the edges despite similar expensive clothing. You look like death, Brandon observed. You look broke, Craig shot back. When are you going to admit that business isn't going well? When are you going to admit you're 31 and living off mom and dad? Touché, Craig said. Now let's get breakfast before the food runs out. They walked to the elevator, Brandon pulling out his keycard to access the executive level. The card reader blinked red. Access denied. That's weird, Brandon said, trying again. Red light. Access denied. Maybe you're doing it wrong, Craig suggested helpfully. I know how to use a keycard, Craig. Brandon tried a third time. Same result. Let me try mine. Craig's card produced the same red light, same denial. What kind of operation are they running here? Craig complained loudly. These cards don't work. Let's go to the front desk, Brandon said, already annoyed. This was exactly the kind of incompetence he didn't need this morning. They rode the elevator down to the lobby, where several other guests were already checking out or heading to breakfast. The morning staff looked fresh and professional, greeting everyone with warm smiles. Brandon walked directly to the front desk, where Emmanuel was working again. Good morning, Mr. Sterling, Emmanuel said cheerfully. How can I help you? Our keycards aren't working for the executive lounge, Brandon said, trying to keep his voice level. We're supposed to have VIP access. Emmanuel's expression remained professionally neutral, but Brandon saw something flicker in his eyes. Let me check your reservation details, sir. The clerk's fingers moved across the keyboard. I see here that your suite reservation includes standard amenities. The executive lounge requires a premium upgrade, which wasn't included in your booking. That's impossible, Brandon said, his voice rising. My assistant specifically arranged VIP treatment. Check again. I'm looking at the reservation now, sir. The presidential suite itself is a premium accommodation, but additional VIP services like the executive lounge, spa access, and rooftop pool require separate purchases. Your reservation doesn't include those add-ons. Craig laughed beside him. Dude, you cheaped out? I didn't cheap out, Brandon snapped. There's obviously been a mistake. I can certainly add those services to your stay, Emmanuel offered. The VIP package for 3 nights would be an additional $2,000 per person, so $10,000 for your party of 5. Brandon felt his stomach drop. $10,000. He didn't have $10,000 to spare. He barely had enough to cover the base suite cost without making his credit card weep. That's ridiculous, Brandon said. Those amenities should be included. Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of business I run? I'm very sorry for the confusion, sir, Emmanuel said, his professionalism unwavering. Would you like to speak with a manager about the situation? Yes, Brandon said firmly. Give me your manager. This is unacceptable. One moment, please. Emmanuel picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it. Yes, we have a situation at the front desk. The guest would like to speak with management. Brandon crossed his arms, aware that other guests were starting to watch. This was embarrassing. The Sterling family didn't get denied service. The Sterling family didn't get told they couldn't afford things. Someone will be with you shortly, Emmanuel said, hanging up the phone. Shortly turned out to be less than 2 minutes. Brandon watched a woman in an elegant pants suit approach from the direction of the executive offices. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. Her natural locks were styled immaculately. Her makeup was flawless. Her jewelry was simple but expensive. Something about her made Brandon's chest tighten with an odd sense of familiarity. Good morning, the woman said, her voice warm but professional. I understand there's been some confusion about amenities? And that's when Brandon's world tilted sideways. Because he knew that voice. He'd heard it beg him to stay 7 years ago. He'd heard it cry over divorce papers. He'd heard it whisper, I love you, when he didn't deserve it. Morgan, he whispered. The woman's smile didn't waver, but something sharp and satisfied flickered in her eyes. Mr. Sterling. I'm Morgan Taylor, CEO and founder of the Meridian Hotel chain. Welcome to my hotel. The lobby seemed to go silent. Or maybe that was just the blood rushing in Brandon's ears. Craig made a strangled sound beside him. From behind them, Patricia's voice cut through the moment. Brandon, what's taking so long? I'm hungry and... Patricia stopped mid-sentence as she reached the front desk and saw who was standing there. You. Mrs. Sterling, Morgan said, her tone perfectly polite. How lovely to see you again. Patricia's face went through several colors: white, red, purple. What is this? What kind of joke is this? No joke, Morgan said simply. I own this hotel. I own all 17 Meridian hotels across the country. When you checked in yesterday, you checked into my business. When you demanded VIP treatment, you demanded it from my staff. And when you mistook me for the help in my own lobby, you revealed exactly who you've always been. Brandon felt like he'd been hit by a truck. Morgan owned this place? Morgan, who he'd left penniless and pregnant, owned a luxury hotel chain? This is impossible, Patricia sputtered. You were a maid. You were nothing. I was a cleaning professional, Morgan corrected calmly. And I paid attention. I learned the business from the ground up. Then I built something real while you spent 7 years assuming I'd failed. That says more about you than it does about me. By now, Nicole and Simone had appeared, drawn by the commotion. Nicole looked confused. Simone looked at Morgan with something like grudging respect. So this is the ex-wife? Simone said. The one you said was probably still scrubbing toilets somewhere? Brandon wanted to disappear. Actually vanish into thin air. I do still ensure toilets are cleaned, Morgan said pleasantly. I just employ over 3,000 people to help with that now. At above-industry wages with full benefits. I don't believe this, Patricia said. This is some kind of con. You can't possibly own this hotel. Morgan pulled out her phone, typed something and showed the screen to Patricia. That's the Meridian Hotel's corporate website. My name. My photo. My company. Would you like to see the ownership documents? Or perhaps you'd like me to have security escort you out while you continue to insist I'm lying in my own establishment. The threat was delivered so sweetly that it took a moment to register. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Now, Morgan continued, about your reservation. Your suite is paid for through checkout on Sunday, and you're welcome to remain as standard guests. However, all VIP privileges have been revoked. The executive lounge, rooftop pool, spa services, and complimentary upgrades you expected are not included in your package and won't be added regardless of payment offered. You can't do that, Brandon finally found his voice. We're paying customers. And you'll receive exactly what you paid for, Morgan said. A beautiful suite, clean rooms, excellent service from my staff. What you won't receive is special treatment you haven't earned and definitely don't deserve. My hotel, my rules. This is discrimination, Patricia said. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. Morgan's smile turned razor sharp. Please do try. I have excellent lawyers who would love to explain how refusing to provide free upgrades to people who treated the owner with contempt 7 years ago isn't actually illegal. I'm not denying you service. I'm just declining to treat you like VIPs. Because you're not. Brandon saw his mother's face cycle through emotions before landing on desperate manipulation. Brandon, are you going to let her talk to your mother this way? But what could Brandon say? What could he possibly do? Morgan held all the power here. She literally owned the building they were standing in. Perhaps we should just go back to the room, he managed. Excellent idea, Morgan said. Enjoy your stay. Standard checkout is 11 a.m. on Sunday. Should you need anything that's actually included in your package, my staff will be happy to assist. Have a wonderful day. She turned and walked away, her confidence absolute. Brandon watched her go, his mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. When had this happened? How had this happened? The woman he'd left broken had become this? I told you that girl was trouble, Patricia hissed, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. This is why we made you leave her. She's vindictive. Mom, Brandon said quietly, she just let us know we're not getting free stuff at her hotel. That's not vindictive. That's business. Don't defend her. But Brandon wasn't defending Morgan. He was just starting to realize 7 years too late, exactly what he'd thrown away. Not for love, he wasn't sure he'd ever really loved her. But for potential. For partnership. For the chance to be with someone who actually built something instead of just pretending to. Craig was laughing. Actually laughing. Bro, your ex-wife is rich. Your ex-wife owns this hotel. Your ex-wife just kicked us out of the VIP lounge. This is the greatest karma moment I've ever witnessed. Shut up, Craig, Nicole snapped, but even she looked impressed. Simone was very quiet, studying Brandon with an expression he couldn't read. You told me she was barely making it, she said softly. You said she was struggling. I thought she was, Brandon said. We haven't spoken in years. Clearly you should have, Simone said, and there was an edge to her voice. Your ex-wife is a CEO, and you're barely keeping your business afloat. That's embarrassing, Brandon. I'm going back to the room, Patricia announced. This is humiliating. Everyone's staring. She was right. Other guests were definitely watching, whispering. Some were pulling out phones. This was going to end up on social media. The Sterling family getting put in their place by a woman they dismissed as worthless. Brandon followed his family back to the elevators, his mind reeling. In the span of 10 minutes, his entire understanding of the last 7 years had shifted. Morgan hadn't failed. She'd succeeded beyond anything he'd ever accomplished. And he'd missed all of it because he'd been too busy listening to his mother and too weak to stand up for what was right. As they rode the elevator in silence, Brandon caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. He looked tired. Older than 33. Worn down by debts and appearances and bad decisions. He thought about Morgan's face in the lobby. Professional. Composed. Powerful. Not angry, just done with them. And he realized that she'd won. Not by destroying them or humiliating them publicly, but by becoming someone they could never diminish again. Back in her office, Morgan sat down at her desk and let out a long breath. Bethany appeared with tea. "How do you feel?" Bethany asked. "Satisfied," Morgan said honestly. "And free. For 7 years, they've lived in my head as these powerful figures who destroyed me. But seeing them this morning? They're just people. Small, insecure people who need to put others down to feel important." "Did you see Patricia's face?" Bethany grinned. "I thought she might actually explode." "She'll recover," Morgan said. "They all will. This isn't about destroying them. It's about making sure they know who I am. What I built. What they missed." Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter. "Aunt Ruth said you faced the bad people today. Did you win?" Morgan smiled and typed back, "I didn't need to win, baby. I already won 7 years ago when I decided to build something real. Today I just showed them the results. Love you. See you tonight." She set her phone down and looked out her window at the city. Somewhere in this building, Brandon Sterling was having the worst morning of his life. Somewhere in this building, Patricia Sterling was planning her next move. Somewhere in this building, a family that had broken her was finally understanding the consequences of underestimating people. And Morgan felt nothing but peace. Because the best revenge really was living well. And she'd lived very, very well indeed. The Sterling family's retreat to their presidential suite was marked by a silence so thick it could choke. Patricia stormed straight to her bedroom and slammed the door. Craig poured himself a drink from the minibar, his third expense Brandon would have to cover. Nicole collapsed on the couch, scrolling furiously through her phone, no doubt looking for any mention of their lobby humiliation. Simone stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, arms crossed, staring out at the city skyline. Brandon recognized her stance. She was building up to something and it wasn't going to be pleasant. 10 years, Simone said finally, not turning around. "We've been together 10 years, married for 8. In all that time, you never once mentioned your ex-wife was capable of something like this." "I didn't know," Brandon said, and it was the truth. "When I left her, she was barely surviving. She had a small cleaning business. She was living in a terrible apartment. I sent child support." "The bare minimum," Simone interrupted. "And you're 4 months behind on that, by the way. I saw the court notices you've been hiding." Brandon's stomach clenched. "Simone. Don't." She finally turned to face him and her expression was cold. "Your ex-wife built a hotel empire while raising your daughter alone. You built a construction company that's falling apart. You lied to your family about VIP services you couldn't afford. You've been hiding debt from me for months. I married you thinking you were successful, Brandon. Turns out you're just good at pretending." "That's not fair," Brandon started, but Craig interrupted with a bitter laugh. "Actually, that's completely fair. We all pretend, Simone. That's what the Sterling family does. We act like we're still important, still wealthy, still relevant. But we're not. Dad's business went under 3 years ago. Mom's living on credit cards and inheritance. I'm a 31-year-old leech. Nicole hasn't held a job in 2 years. And Brandon's construction company is hemorrhaging money. We're all just really committed to the illusion." "Craig, shut up," Nicole snapped, but her heart wasn't in it. "Why?" Craig took another drink. "Everyone already knows. Morgan certainly knows. She probably looked into all of us before we even booked this room. That's what successful people do, they do their homework. We just show up and expect the world to treat us like we matter." Brandon sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. Craig was right. About all of it. The Sterling family was built on appearances, on the memory of wealth rather than actual wealth. His grandfather had made real money. His father had managed to maintain some of it. But Brandon's generation? They were coasting on fumes and family name. Meanwhile, Morgan, who they dismissed as beneath them, had actually built something real. "I need to talk to her," Brandon said suddenly. "No," Simone said firmly. "You need to leave her alone. For once in your life, Brandon, have some dignity. That woman doesn't owe you anything. She doesn't owe you her time, her attention, or her forgiveness. She moved on. She built a life. And you weren't part of it. I have a daughter, Brandon said. Doesn't that matter? You have a daughter you haven't seen in 7 years, Simone corrected. A daughter whose name you barely mention. A daughter whose child support you can't keep current. Don't suddenly pretend to care about fatherhood now that you realize her mother is successful. The truth in Simone's words hit like physical blows. Brandon opened his mouth to argue, but what could he say? She was right. Arya was 7 years old, and he'd chosen to be absent from her entire life. Not because Morgan kept her from him, she'd never blocked his access. He'd chosen it. Because being a father was hard and walking away had been easier. Patricia emerged from her bedroom, her face composed but her eyes blazing. We're leaving, she announced. I won't stay another moment in that woman's hotel. Pack your things. We'll find somewhere else to spend the weekend. Mom, we already paid for the room, Nicole pointed out. Where else are we going to go? Anywhere but here, Patricia said. I won't be humiliated like this. You humiliated yourself, Craig said, and even Brandon was surprised by the anger in his brother's voice. You treated that woman like trash 7 years ago. You convinced Brandon to leave his pregnant wife. You told all of us that Morgan wasn't good enough for this family. And now she owns 17 hotels while we're living on credit and nostalgia. Maybe the problem isn't Morgan. Maybe the problem is us. How dare you, Patricia breathed. I raised you. I gave you everything. You gave us nothing but ego and entitlement, Craig said. And for what? So we could all end up like this? Broke and desperate but wearing designer clothes? I'm done, Mom. I'm done pretending we're better than people who actually work for what they have. Craig grabbed his jacket and walked out of the suite, the door closing firmly behind him. The remaining family members stood in stunned silence. He'll come back, Patricia said, but she didn't sound convinced. Brandon's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Mr. Sterling, the Johnson project just pulled out. They said they don't want to work with someone who treats family poorly. Something about a video? Brandon's hands shook as he opened his social media apps. It took less than 30 seconds to find the video. Someone had filmed their lobby confrontation with Morgan. The audio wasn't perfect, but you could hear Patricia calling Morgan nothing, and Morgan calmly explaining that she owned the hotel chain. The video had been posted 2 hours ago. It already had 50,000 views and was climbing. The comments were brutal. Imagine being so entitled you don't recognize the owner of the hotel you're staying at. That CEO is pure class. I'd work for her in a heartbeat. The way she handled that terrible family with complete professionalism? Queen behavior. The Sterling family thinks they're too good for the woman who owns the hotel they're staying at. Make it make sense. One comment had been shared hundreds of times. Just looked up Meridian Hotels. CEO Morgan Taylor started as a cleaning lady and built this empire as a single mom. Meanwhile, her ex-husband's construction company has a C rating with the Better Business Bureau. Do with that information what you will. We're trending, Brandon said numbly. What? Simone grabbed his phone. Her face paled as she scrolled through the comments. Oh my God. Brandon, this is everywhere. We're a meme. She stopped, reading something that made her expression harden. People are calling your business. They're saying they won't work with you because of how you treated Morgan. That's not fair, Brandon protested weakly. That was 7 years ago. You literally tried to deny her VIP access got revoked this morning, Simone pointed out. This isn't about 7 years ago. This is about who you are right now. Nicole was scrolling on her own phone, her face growing increasingly distressed. My friends are texting me. Everyone's seen the video. They're asking why Mom called Morgan nothing, when Morgan obviously built something incredible. Because Morgan is nothing, Patricia insisted, but even she sounded less certain. She was a maid. That's all she'll ever be to me. She's a CO, Simone said flatly. She's successful. She's respected. And you just called her nothing in front of witnesses and cameras. Patricia, you've destroyed whatever reputation this family had left. I've destroyed? Patricia's voice rose. That woman set us up. She knew we were coming. She probably planned this whole thing. Or, Simone said, you booked a hotel without knowing who owned it, acted exactly like the entitled person you've always been, and got exactly what you deserved. You're not the victim here, Patricia. You're the lesson. Brandon watched his wife, his usually supportive, usually passive wife, stand up to his mother. When had Simone developed a spine? When had she stopped being impressed by the Sterling family name? Maybe around the same time she'd started seeing through his lies about money. "I'm going for a walk," Simone announced. "I need to think about some things." "What things?" Brandon asked, though he suspected he knew. "Things like whether I want to be married to a man who abandoned his child and then acts surprised when karma catches up. Things like whether the Sterling family name is worth the embarrassment. Things like whether I've wasted 10 years of my life with someone who values appearance over substance." She grabbed her purse and left, leaving Brandon alone with his mother and sister. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "This is fixable," Patricia finally said, but she didn't sound convinced. "We'll issue a statement. We'll explain that we were shocked, that emotions were high, that—" "That what?" Brandon interrupted. "That we treated Morgan like garbage 7 years ago and haven't changed? That I abandoned my daughter? That you told my ex-wife she was worthless? What statement fixes that, Mom? Don't take that tone with me." "What tone should I take?" Brandon felt something breaking inside him. 7 years of justifying his choices, 7 years of listening to his mother's poison, 7 years of pretending he'd made the right decision. "I left my pregnant wife because you told me to. I've missed 7 years of my daughter's life because you convinced me it was the right choice. And now I'm watching my ex-wife, a woman you said would fail, succeed beyond anything our family has ever accomplished. What tone should I take about that?" Patricia's face hardened. "If you're going to side with that woman—" "I'm not siding with anyone," Brandon said tiredly. "I'm just finally seeing the truth. Morgan didn't need me. She didn't need our family's money or connections or name. She built something real all by herself. And I could have been part of that. I could have been there, watching her build, helping her raise our daughter, being an actual partner. But I chose you instead. I chose appearances instead. And now I have nothing to show for it except debt and embarrassment." He stood up, suddenly exhausted. "I'm going down to the business center. I need to try to salvage what's left of my company before everyone in the industry watches that video and decides I'm not worth working with." "Brandon." "No, Mom. I'm done. Craig's right. We're not better than Morgan. We're not better than anyone. We just pretended we were for so long that we started believing it. But the truth is in that lobby video. Morgan is everything we pretended to be. And we're nothing but pretend." He left his mother standing in the suite, her face a mask of fury and, if he wasn't mistaken, fear. Because Patricia Sterling's entire identity was built on being better than others. And Morgan had just proven, beyond doubt, that Patricia wasn't better. Just louder. Down in the business center, Brandon opened his laptop and started reading the emails flooding in. 3 more clients canceling contracts. 2 potential deals withdrawn. A message from his bank about his line of credit. Another message from his accountant about quarterly taxes he couldn't pay. His business was collapsing and he had no one to blame but himself. Through the glass wall of the business center he could see the hotel lobby. Efficient staff, happy guests, beautiful design. Every detail spoke of care and quality. This was what Morgan had built. This was what she'd become. And he'd missed all of it because he'd been too weak to stand up to his mother, too cowardly to be a real father, too focused on appearances to see substance. His phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from a number he didn't recognize. "Hi, Mr. Sterling. This is Craig. I'm checking out early and going home. I'm also going to call Aria's mother and apologize for how our family treated her. You should do the same, but we both know you won't. Good luck with everything. You're going to need it." Brandon stared at the message. His little brother, the family screw-up, the one they all looked down on, was apologizing to Morgan. Was taking accountability. Was being more of a man than Brandon had ever been. He typed a response 3 times and deleted it 3 times. What could he possibly say? Finally he settled on, "Tell her I'm sorry." Craig's response was immediate, "Tell her yourself. If you have the guts." But Brandon didn't have the guts. He'd proven that 7 years ago when he'd walked out. He'd proven it every day since when he'd sent minimum child support and told himself he was being responsible. He'd proven it this morning when he tried to argue with Morgan in her own lobby. He didn't have the guts to face what he'd done, who he'd become, or the woman he'd underestimated. So he sat in the business center of his ex-wife's hotel, watching his life fall apart, and did what he'd always done. He blamed everyone but himself and changed nothing. By evening the video had gone viral. Not just trending viral. Over 2 million views. News outlets were picking it up. Business magazines were writing articles about Morgan's rise from cleaning lady to CEO. The narrative had taken on a life of its own. Successful black woman entrepreneur who overcame abandonment and built an empire, versus entitled family who underestimated her. Morgan had given exactly one statement to the press, through her PR team. We at Meridian Hotels treat all guests with respect and professionalism. We expect the same courtesy in return. This incident has been resolved privately, and we have no further comment. Professional. Classy. Giving nothing away while the internet filled in the gaps with their own interpretations. Brandon sat in the hotel bar, nursing a drink he couldn't afford, watching the news coverage on the mounted television. His phone kept buzzing with calls from his mother, his sister, potential clients backing out, friends asking if it was true. He'd stopped answering hours ago. Simone hadn't come back to the room. Craig had checked out. Nicole had locked herself in her room, probably crying about her ruined social media presence. Patricia had called the front desk 17 times trying to complain to management, only to be politely told that management had nothing further to discuss. Mind if I sit? A woman's voice asked. Brandon looked up to find Morgan standing beside his table. She wasn't in her business suit anymore. She'd changed into casual but expensive clothes, looking like any other wealthy patron taking advantage of the hotel's amenities. But there was nothing casual about the way she carried herself. It's your hotel, Brandon said. You can sit wherever you want. Morgan slid into the booth across from him, not ordering anything, just sitting there with that calm, evaluating expression he'd seen this morning. It made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. You should know, Brandon said, I didn't plan this. The hotel booking. Coming here. I had no idea this was yours. I know, Morgan said simply. Your assistant follows travel influencers. They posted about the Meridian Grand. It was random chance that you ended up here. Was it? Brandon looked at her. Or did you pay for those influencer posts? Morgan's smile was small and satisfied. I prepared for the possibility. I didn't arrange it, but I wasn't surprised by it either. You always did like to show off, Brandon. I knew eventually you'd find your way to one of my hotels. I just didn't know when. You've been waiting 7 years for this moment? No, Morgan said, and she sounded honest. I've been building for 7 years. This moment was a bonus, not the goal. Whether you showed up or not, I still have 17 successful hotels, a daughter I'm incredibly proud of, and a life I built from nothing. You showing up doesn't change that. It just gives me the opportunity to show you what you missed. Brandon took a drink, buying time to find words. You've done well for yourself. I've worked hard for myself, Morgan corrected. There's a difference. Doing well implies luck. I wasn't lucky, Brandon. I was determined. I was smart. I was willing to sacrifice and struggle and build. While you were spending 7 years pretending to be successful, I was actually becoming successful. That's not fair, Brandon said. I've built a business. I employ people. You've built a company that's months away from bankruptcy, Morgan interrupted calmly. You're 4 months behind on child support for a daughter you've never visited. You lied to your family about VIP services because you couldn't afford them. You're living on credit and appearances. That's not building, Brandon. That's pretending. How do you know about my finances? I have a daughter with you, Morgan said. You think I don't keep track of who owes her support? I have lawyers who monitor everything related to area's welfare. I know your business is failing. I know you're in debt. I know Simone is realizing she married someone who values image over substance. I know all of it, Brandon. Because I pay attention to things that might affect my child. Our child? Brandon said quietly. No. Morgan's voice was firm. My child. You signed away your rights when you walked out. You surrendered your claim when you chose your mother over your daughter. Aria is mine. She doesn't ask about you. She doesn't miss you. She doesn't need you. Because I made sure she had everything she needed without you. The words hurt more than Brandon expected. I could have been there. If you'd asked. Asked? Morgan's laugh was sharp. I'm sorry, did I miss the part where it's the abandoned mother's job to beg the absent father to be present? You knew where we were. You had my number. You sent child support checks. You knew how to find us if you wanted to. You just didn't want to. My mother said. Your mother said what she always says, Morgan interrupted. That people like me aren't good enough for people like you. And you believed her because believing her was easier than thinking for yourself. But here's the thing, Brandon. I wasn't good enough for you. I was too good for you. And I proved it by building something you could only dream of while you spent 7 years coasting on your family name. Brandon felt something inside him crumble. I made a mistake. Yes, you did, Morgan agreed. But not the one you think. Your mistake wasn't leaving me honestly, that was the best thing you could have done for me. Your mistake was listening to your mother when she told you success comes from who you know instead of what you build. Your mistake was choosing appearances over authenticity. Your mistake was believing that a title and a family name would carry you through life without actual work. So what now? Brandon asked. You've proven your point. You've shown my family that you're successful. You've made us all look foolish. What else do you want? Nothing, Morgan said simply. I don't want anything from you, Brandon. Not your apology. Not your regret. Not your attempts at redemption. I just wanted you to see. To understand. To realize that the woman you discarded built a life you can't even imagine. That's it. That's all I needed. And Arya? Brandon asked, his voice cracking. Do I have any rights? Any chance to what? Be her father now that her mother is rich? Morgan's eyes were hard. No, Brandon. You had 7 years to be her father. 7 years to show up, call, visit, be present. You sent minimum child support and told yourself that was enough. It wasn't. And now that she's 7 years old and doesn't need you, now that I'm successful and you're struggling, you suddenly want to be involved? That's not love. That's opportunism. She's my daughter too. Biologically, yes. In every other way that matters, no. Arya has a family. She has me, Aunt Ruth, Uncle Gerald, Aunt Bethany, and about 3,000 hotel staff members who've watched her grow up. She has people who show up, who care, who ask about her day and help with her homework and attend her dance recitals. What she doesn't have is a father who abandoned her, and she's better off for it. Morgan stood up, preparing to leave. Brandon reached out, not quite touching her arm, but enough to make her pause. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry. You deserved better. Arya deserved better. You're right, Morgan said. We both did. And we found it without you. She paused, then added, here's some free advice, Brandon. Stop living for your mother. Stop living for appearances. Figure out who you actually are and what you actually want to build. Not the image of success, but real success. Otherwise, you're going to be 50 years old, still pretending, still empty, still wondering why everyone else seems to figure it out except you. She walked away before he could respond, her stride confident, her shoulders straight. Brandon watched her go and realized that she hadn't come to the bar for him. She hadn't come to gloat or argue or even really talk. She'd come to close a door. To seal off a chapter of her life that he'd been holding open with his own guilt and regret. And now the door was closed. Locked. Finished. Brandon sat alone in the bar for another hour, ordering drinks he'd regret paying for, watching the video of his humiliation play on loop on the news. Every replay showed the same thing. His mother's entitled cruelty, his own weakness, and Morgan's absolute composure. By the time he went back to the suite, Simone had returned. She was packing her suitcase. What are you doing? Brandon asked, though he knew. Going home, Simone said without looking at him. Then probably to my mother's house. Then probably to a lawyer. Simone, we can work through this. No, Brandon. We can't. Because working through it would require you to change, and you won't. You'll apologize and promise to do better, but you won't actually do the work. You'll keep listening to your mother, keep choosing appearances over reality, keep making excuses. And I'm tired of being married to a man who's more concerned with looking successful than being successful. I can change, Brandon said desperately. I can be better. Oh. You've had 10 years to be better, Simone interrupted, finally looking at him. 10 years of me supporting you, believing in you, defending you to my family and friends. And what did I get for it? A failing business, hidden debts, and a viral video showing the world that I married a man who abandoned his own child. I deserve more than that. I deserve someone who's actually who they pretend to be. She zipped her suitcase. I'll send for the rest of my things next week. My attorney will be in touch about the divorce papers. Simone, please. Goodbye, Brandon. I hope you figure out who you are eventually. But I'm not waiting around to see if you do. She left, pulling her suitcase behind her, not looking back. Brandon sank onto the couch in the now quiet suite. Through the walls, he could hear his mother's television, probably watching news coverage and fuming. Nicole was still hiding. Craig was gone. Simone was gone. His business was crumbling. His reputation was in pieces. And somewhere in this building, in her office or maybe at home with his daughter he'd never met, Morgan Taylor was probably sleeping peacefully. Because she'd already won. She'd won 7 years ago when she'd decided to build instead of break. She'd won every day since while he'd been pretending. And he'd lost. Not because she'd destroyed him, she hadn't even tried. He'd destroyed himself with his own choices, his own weakness, his own inability to be the man he'd pretended to be. The presidential suite, with its beautiful views and expensive furniture, felt like a tomb, a monument to his failures. A reminder that sometimes the person you underestimate ends up defining your limits. Brandon picked up his phone and opened his banking app. He needed to figure out how he was going to pay for this hotel stay. How he was going to cover the costs Simone had racked up. How he was going to keep his business afloat for even one more month. The numbers didn't work. They hadn't worked for a while. He'd just been pretending they did. Just like he'd been pretending everything else. And now, in the presidential suite of Morgan Taylor's hotel, surrounded by the evidence of her success and his failure, Brandon Sterling finally had to face the truth he'd been avoiding for 7 years. He'd made the wrong choice. He'd believed the wrong person. He'd become everything he'd feared Morgan would be: desperate, struggling, and alone. While she'd become everything he'd pretended to be: successful, respected, and free. The irony wasn't lost on him. But understanding irony didn't change anything. It just made the pain sharper and the regret deeper. Tomorrow he'd check out. Tomorrow he'd go home to an empty house and a failing business. Tomorrow he'd start figuring out how to rebuild a life he'd let rot from the inside out. But tonight, he sat in the dark of a luxury suite he couldn't afford, in a hotel owned by a woman he'd underestimated, and finally understood what he'd lost. Not Morgan. He'd never really had her, not the real her. What he'd lost was the chance to be part of something real. To build instead of pretend. To rise instead of coast. Morgan had offered him that chance 10 years ago. And he'd walked away. Now it was too late. The door was closed. The chapter was over. And Brandon Sterling was nothing but a footnote in Morgan Taylor's story of success. A cautionary tale of what happens when you choose appearance over substance, weakness over strength, pretense over reality. And as lessons go, it was one he'd never forget, even if it came 7 years too late to do any good. The fallout from the viral video lasted for weeks, but its effects would ripple through the Sterling family for much longer. By Monday morning, Brandon's business had lost 7 major contracts. By Tuesday, his bank had called the note on his line of credit. By Wednesday, Patricia had been asked to resign from 2 charity boards. Her comments about Morgan were deemed inconsistent with organizational values of inclusion and respect. But that was just the beginning. Morgan, for her part, continued as she always had. She opened her 10th hotel right on schedule. She appeared on a podcast about entrepreneurship and was asked about the viral incident. Her response was measured and professional. "I've learned that success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. When you focus on building something meaningful, the opinions of those who doubted you become irrelevant." The clip from that podcast went viral too, but for different reasons. Morgan became an inspiration. Hashtags like #BuildDon'tBreak and #MorganTaylor trended. Her story resonated with single mothers, people who'd been underestimated, anyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. Offers came flooding in. Speaking engagements, book deals, partnerships with major hotel chains that wanted to learn her employee retention strategies, a feature in Forbes, an invitation to speak at a prestigious business school about ethical leadership. Through it all, Morgan remained grounded. She still walked through her hotels, learning the names of new staff members. She still had dinner at home with Arya most nights. She still remembered where she came from, not as a source of shame but as a foundation of strength. 3 months after the confrontation, Craig Sterling showed up at the Meridian corporate offices. He wasn't announced. He just arrived, asking the front desk if he could speak with Morgan Taylor. The receptionist, familiar with the Sterling name, looked uncertain. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Sterling?" "No," Craig admitted. "But I'm hoping she'll see me anyway. I understand if she won't. I'll wait if I need to." The receptionist called Bethany, who came down personally to assess the situation. She found Craig sitting in the lobby, not on his phone, not causing a scene, just sitting patiently with the demeanor of someone who knew he had no right to demand anything. "Mr. Sterling," Bethany said coolly. Craig stood immediately. "I know I have no right to be here. I know my family has caused Miss Taylor enough trouble. But I wanted to apologize in person, and I was hoping I could speak with her for just 5 minutes. If she says no, I'll leave and never come back." Bethany studied him for a long moment. "Wait here." She returned 15 minutes later. "Miss Taylor will give you 10 minutes. Follow me." Craig was led to a conference room, not Morgan's office. A small power play that Craig understood and accepted. He was on her territory, on her time, and he had no leverage whatsoever. Morgan entered wearing a business suit, her expression neutral but not hostile. She sat across from Craig, Bethany standing by the door like a guardian. "You have 10 minutes, Morgan said. "What do you want to say?" I'm sorry, Craig said immediately. For everything. For how my family treated you 7 years ago. For my part in making you feel less than what you are. For standing by while my mother said terrible things. For not speaking up when Brandon left you. For laughing at jokes about you struggling. For all of it. I was younger and stupider, but that doesn't excuse it. You didn't deserve any of what we put you through. Morgan listened without interruption, her face giving nothing away. I also wanted to tell you, Craig continued, that your example changed my life. Watching you in that lobby, how you handled my mother with such grace while making it clear you wouldn't tolerate disrespect, it made me realize how far I've fallen. I'm 31 years old and I've never built anything. I've just coasted on my family name while mocking people who actually work. That's pathetic. Yes, it is, Morgan agreed bluntly. Craig nodded, accepting the assessment. I enrolled in a business program at community college. I got a job at a hotel, not one of yours. I didn't want to make this uncomfortable working front desk. Starting at the bottom, learning the actual work. I don't know if I'll ever build something like you have, but I want to try. I want to be the kind of person who earns respect instead of expecting it. Morgan leaned back in her chair, considering him. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know that you made a difference. Not just in your own life but in mine. You didn't owe me or my family anything, but your example taught me something my parents never did. Character matters more than appearance. Work matters more than words. And the only person responsible for my life is me. That's a nice speech, Morgan said. But words are cheap, Craig. Your family is very good at words. You're right, Craig said. Which is why I'm not asking you for anything. Not forgiveness, not a job, not validation. I'm just telling you that you changed my life and I wanted you to know that. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. But it's the truth. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I believe you. But belief doesn't mean trust. Trust is earned over years, not minutes. If you're serious about changing, prove it with your actions. Build something real. Be consistent. Show up even when it's hard. That's what I did, and it's the only way forward. I understand, Craig said. And I will. Thank you for your time, Miss Taylor. He stood to leave, but Morgan spoke again. Craig, one more thing. He turned back. Your brother, Morgan said. Brandon. He hasn't contacted Arya. He hasn't tried to be involved in her life even after all of this. I want you to know that if he ever does reach out, it won't be because I stopped him. It will be because he chose not to for 7 years and then realized too late what he missed. That's his loss, not hers. I know, Craig said quietly. Brandon's dealing with his own failures right now. His business is gone. Simone filed for divorce. He's living with Mom and they're both miserable. He talks about Arya sometimes, but only in the context of regret. He's not ready to be a father. He might never be. Then Arya is better off without him, Morgan said firmly. She has a good life. A full life. A life with people who actually show up for her. She doesn't need a father who only appears when it's convenient. She's lucky to have you as her mother, Craig said. My brother's an idiot for walking away from that. Yes, he is, Morgan agreed. But his idiocy gave me the freedom to become who I was meant to be. So in a way I should thank him for leaving. I just never will. After Craig left, Bethany returned to the conference room. What do you think? Was he sincere? Probably, Morgan said. But sincerity doesn't undo damage. It's just the first step. He's got years of work ahead if he wants to actually change. Most people give up before they get there. You didn't, Bethany pointed out. I didn't have a choice, Morgan said. I had a daughter to support and a life to build. Craig has options. People with options usually take the easy ones. But maybe he'll surprise me. People occasionally do. Meanwhile, at the small apartment Patricia and Brandon now shared, Patricia's house had been sold to cover debts. Mother and son sat in uncomfortable silence. The television played news coverage of Morgan's latest success, a partnership with a major environmental organization to make all Meridian hotels carbon neutral within 5 years. That should have been you, Patricia said for the 100th time. If you'd stayed with her, that would be your success. No, Mom, Brandon said tiredly. That's her success. She built it without me and she would have built it with me holding her back. I wasn't strong enough to be her partner. I was too busy trying to impress you. Don't blame me for your failures, Patricia snapped. I'm not, Brandon said. I'm blaming myself for listening when you told me to leave my pregnant wife. For believing you when you said Morgan wasn't good enough. For choosing your approval over my family. That's all on me. But I'm done listening to you about anything. Patricia looked shocked. How dare you speak to me? Like I should have 7 years ago, Brandon interrupted. Like Craig did 3 months ago. Like someone who finally realizes that everything you taught us about success was wrong. Success isn't about who you know or what you wear or how much you can impress people. It's about what you build and how you treat people while building it. Morgan understood that. You never did. After everything I've done for you, you've done nothing but teach me to value the wrong things, Brandon said. And now I'm paying the price for that education. My business is gone. My marriage is over. My reputation is ruined. And I have a daughter who doesn't know me because I was too concerned about your opinion to be her father. That's what your guidance got me, Mom. Nothing but loss. He stood up. I'm moving out. I got a job managing a construction crew. It's not glamorous and it doesn't pay well, but it's honest work. I'm going to rebuild my life the right way this time. Without pretense. Without appearances. Without you telling me what I'm supposed to do. Brandon. No, Mom. I'm done. You can keep living in your delusions of grandeur if you want. But I'm choosing reality. I'm choosing to be the kind of person my daughter could be proud of, even if she never knows who I am. And I'm choosing to stop blaming everyone else for my own choices. Brandon walked out of the apartment with just a duffel bag of clothes. He didn't have much else, most of his possessions had been sold to cover debts. But he felt lighter than he had in years. He wasn't stupid enough to think Morgan would ever forgive him. He wasn't delusional enough to imagine he could have a relationship with Arya after 7 years of absence. But he could be better. He could build something real even if it was small. He could stop pretending and start actually living. It wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't undo his mistakes. But it was a start. And as Morgan had shown him, sometimes starting from nothing is exactly what you need to build something real. 6 months after the viral video, Brandon saw Morgan one more time. He was working a construction site when she pulled up in a sleek car, getting out to inspect the property. Her hotel chain was expanding again, and his crew had been contracted for the initial demolition work. She didn't recognize him at first. He was wearing work clothes, a hard hat, and had lost the polished appearance of his former life. When she finally did recognize him, her expression flickered with surprise before settling back into professional neutrality. Mr. Sterling, she said. I wasn't aware you were on this crew. Just Brandon, he said. And yeah, I'm the crew manager. It's honest work. It is, she agreed. Good work too. This property is important to us. We're turning it into a training center for hospitality workers, paid internships, career development, the whole thing. That's great, Brandon said, and he meant it. You're building something that matters. I always have been, Morgan said simply. You just didn't notice. I notice now, Brandon said. For what it's worth. Morgan looked at him for a long moment. Your daughter is 8 now. She just won a science fair with a project about sustainable building materials. She's smart and kind and curious. She asks about the world and wants to make it better. She's everything I could have hoped for. Brandon felt tears prick his eyes. I'm glad. She deserves the best. She has it, Morgan said. She has a mother who fights for her, teachers who encourage her, and a community that supports her. She doesn't need anything else. I know, Brandon whispered. I just wanted you to know. I'm trying to be better. Not for you or for her because I know that ship has sailed. But for myself. So I can look in the mirror and not hate what I see. Then I hope you succeed, Morgan said, and she sounded genuine. Everyone deserves the chance to be better than they were. But being better doesn't erase the past. It just gives you a different future. She walked away to inspect the construction site and Brandon went back to work. They didn't speak again that day. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness, Morgan would never forgive him and he didn't deserve it. But acknowledgement. He was trying. She saw that. It didn't change anything but it was something. And for now something was enough. Because Morgan Taylor had taught him one final lesson without even trying. You don't get to start over with the people you hurt. You just get to be better for the people you haven't hurt yet. And that would have to be enough. 6 months. That's how long it took for the Sterling family to completely fall apart. But 6 months can also be enough time for small seeds of change to take root, even if they don't bloom into redemption. Brandon had settled into his new life with the kind of determination that only comes from hitting rock bottom. The construction crew job paid his bills but not much else. He lived in a studio apartment in a building that would have horrified his mother. He ate simple meals. He saved every extra dollar. He was starting over at 33, learning humility in every interaction. But the unexpected twist in Morgan's story didn't come from Brandon. It came from someone she'd never anticipated, Simone. Morgan was in her office reviewing plans for the 12th Meridian Hotel when Bethany knocked on her door. "There's someone here to see you," Bethany said, her tone carefully neutral. "Simone Sterling." "Well, technically she's filed for divorce, so maybe not Sterling much longer." Morgan looked up, surprised. "Did she say what she wants?" "To talk. She says she'll wait as long as necessary. She's been in the lobby for 30 minutes already. Very polite. Very patient. Very different from her family." Morgan was curious despite herself. "Send her in." Simone entered looking far different from the woman Morgan had seen at the hotel 6 months ago. Gone were the designer clothes and expensive highlights. She wore simple but professional attire, a woman who'd stopped performing wealth and started living within her means. "Miss Taylor," Simone said. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to be here. Yet here you are," Morgan said. "Sit. Tell me what this is about." Simone sat across from Morgan's desk, her hands folded in her lap. "I wanted to apologize. For myself, not on behalf of the Sterling family. I was married to Brandon for 8 years, and in all that time I never asked him about you. Not really. I accepted his version of the story, that you were unstable, that the marriage had been a mistake, that you trapped him with a pregnancy. I believed him because believing him was easier than questioning the man I'd married." "Why are you telling me this?" Morgan asked. "Because I owe you the truth," Simone said. "After that video went viral, I did something I should have done years ago. I looked you up. Not just the recent stuff, I went deep. I found articles about your cleaning business. I found the small local newspaper story about you working 3 jobs while pregnant. I found Dorothy Chen's obituary, which mentioned you as the daughter I never had. I found every piece of your story that Brandon never told me." Morgan felt something soften slightly. "Dorothy died 2 years ago," Simone said gently. "Peacefully, from what the article said. She left you a portion of her estate. Did you know?" "She left me the Riverside Inn," Morgan said quietly. "But I turned it into a memorial scholarship fund in her name. She gave me my start. I wanted to give others theirs." Simone nodded. "That's who you are. Someone who pays kindness forward. And Brandon told me you were selfish. That you tried to trap him with a baby and take his money. He painted you as the villain for years, and I never questioned it." "Why didn't you?" Morgan asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. "Because I wanted to believe I'd married a good man," Simone admitted. "If you were the problem, then Brandon was innocent. It let me ignore all the red flags, the way he talked about people in service positions, his mother's cruelty disguised as honesty, how he never took responsibility for anything. I told myself those were minor flaws. But they weren't. They were symptoms of something rotten at the core." "So you're apologizing," Morgan said. "That's nice. But what do you want from me? Absolution? Validation? I'm not your therapist, Simone." "I don't want anything," Simone said firmly. "I came because you deserve to hear someone from Brandon's life acknowledge that you were wronged. Not just by him but by me too. I spent 8 years enjoying a lifestyle funded partly by child support meant for your daughter. I lived in willful ignorance while you were building an empire and raising a child alone. That makes me complicit." Morgan leaned back in her chair, studying the woman across from her. "You filed for divorce?" "Immediately after that weekend," Simone confirmed. "The papers were served a month later. I walked away with nothing. I didn't want anything connected to Brandon or his family. I got a job at a nonprofit that helps women escape financial abuse. I'm learning about money, independence, and rebuilding. I'm starting over at 32. It's humbling. But it's honest." "Good for you," Morgan said, and she meant it. "Honesty is underrated. So is starting over. I did it at 26 with a newborn. You'll survive at 32. "I know," Simone said. "Because you showed me it's possible. You showed a lot of women it's possible. That video, the one that ruined Brandon's reputation, it changed my life. I saw you standing there, calm and powerful, while Patricia tried to diminish you, and I thought, that's who I want to be. Not the woman apologizing for her husband's family, but the woman who builds something nobody can take away." Morgan felt something unfamiliar, a kind of kinship she hadn't expected. "What do you want to build?" "I don't know yet," Simone admitted. "But I'm figuring it out. I'm taking classes. I'm learning. I'm asking questions. I'm becoming the person I should have been all along instead of the person Brandon wanted me to be." "That's good," Morgan said. "Don't let anyone tell you what you should be. Not me, not a therapist, not a motivational speaker. Figure it out yourself. It's harder that way, but it's real." "I will," Simone promised. She stood to leave. Thank you for your time. And thank you for showing women like me that we don't have to accept the stories men tell us about other women. We can look for ourselves and make our own decisions. Wait, Morgan said as Simone reached the door. You said you looked into my history. Did you see anything about Arya? Simone turned back. Your daughter? Only that she exists and that you've kept her out of the public eye as much as possible. Why? Because Brandon doesn't deserve to know her, Morgan said bluntly. And if he ever tries to use people from his life to get information about her, I need to know who can't be trusted. Can you be trusted, Simone? Absolutely, Simone said without hesitation. I want nothing to do with Brandon or his family. I blocked all their numbers. I'm building a life separate from anything Sterling related. Your daughter is safe from me in every way. Then we're good, Morgan said. And Simone? For what it's worth, leaving takes courage. Building after leaving takes more. You'll be fine. After Simone left, Morgan sat in her office thinking about unexpected twists. She'd prepared for Brandon to be weak. She'd expected Patricia to be cruel. She'd known Craig might have some self-awareness. But Simone? Simone had surprised her. Sometimes people married to the wrong person for the wrong reasons could still make right choices eventually. Sometimes the enabling wife became the empowered ex-wife. Sometimes growth happened in the wreckage. Morgan hoped Simone would make it. Not because she owed Simone anything she didn't, but because every woman who left a situation that diminished her and built something real was proof that it could be done. And the more proof that existed, the more women would believe they could do it too. Later that evening, Morgan picked up Arya from her after-school program. Her daughter bounced into the car, full of stories about science experiments and art projects and her best friend's upcoming birthday party. Mom, Arya said as they drove home, Miss Bethany told me you had a busy day with lots of meetings. Were they good meetings? Some were expected, Morgan said. One was unexpected. But both were necessary. What's the difference? Arya asked, her 8-year-old curiosity engaged. Expected meetings are about business things I plan for and prepare for, Morgan explained. Unexpected meetings are about people surprising you. Sometimes people you thought you knew turn out to be different than you assumed. Is that good or bad? It depends on how they surprise you, Morgan said. If they surprise you by being better than expected, that's good. If they surprise you by being worse, that's a lesson. Both have value. You're really wise, Mom, Arya said seriously. Morgan laughed. I'm really experienced, baby. There's a difference. Wisdom is knowing what to do. Experience is knowing what doesn't work so you can find what does. That night, after Arya was asleep, Morgan stood at her apartment window looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Brandon was in his studio apartment, probably wondering if he'd ever build something meaningful again. Somewhere out there, Patricia was alone, probably still bitter about losing status. Somewhere out there, Craig was working his front desk job trying to become someone real. And somewhere out there, Simone was building a new life, shedding the person she'd pretended to be. All of them were dealing with consequences. Some self-inflicted, some inherited, all real. But Morgan wasn't part of their journey anymore. She'd closed that chapter. She'd said what needed to be said. She'd shown them who she'd become. And now she was moving forward with her actual life, the hotels, the employees, the daughter, the dreams that kept expanding. The unexpected twist wasn't that people from her past had apologized. It was that their apologies didn't matter as much as she'd once thought they would. For years, Morgan had imagined confronting Brandon and his family. She'd imagined their shock, their regret, their begging for forgiveness. She'd imagined it would feel satisfying, vindicating, powerful. And it had, for about 5 minutes. But after that initial rush, Morgan had realized something profound. Her success wasn't actually about them. It never had been. They were the catalyst, not the purpose. They'd rejected her, which had freed her to become someone they couldn't control or diminish. But the actual building, the hotels, the employees, the life she'd created that was hers. Born from her determination, grown through her sacrifices, sustained by her vision. Brandon and his family had played their role in her story. They were the obstacles she'd overcome, the doubt she'd disproven, the low expectations she'd exceeded. But they weren't the point. They were just the beginning. And now, with her empire established, her daughter thriving, and her peace secured, Morgan Taylor could finally release them from her thoughts entirely. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Not even with satisfaction. Just with a simple, liberating truth. They didn't matter anymore. They were footnotes in a story that had moved far beyond them. And footnotes, no matter how dramatic, never defined the whole book. Morgan closed the curtains and went to check on Arya one more time before bed. Her daughter slept peacefully, clutching her stuffed elephant, completely secure in the love and stability Morgan had built for her. That was the real twist. Not the revenge. Not the success. Not even the vindication. The real twist was that the best life wasn't built on proving others wrong. It was built on proving yourself right. Anne Morgan Taylor had proven herself spectacularly, wonderfully, undeniably right. Everything else was just noise. 2 years after the viral video, Morgan stood at the grand opening of her 25th hotel, a milestone she'd once thought impossible. The Meridian Crest, located in her hometown, was her most personal project. This was where she'd grown up, where she'd dreamed, where she'd been told repeatedly that people like her didn't become people like this. The building stood as a testament to what the town had told her she couldn't do. Arya, now 10 years old, stood beside her mother wearing a beautiful dress and a smile that lit up the room. She'd helped design the hotel's children's library, a space where kids could read, dream, and believe in possibilities. Above the library entrance, a plaque read, "For every child who dares to dream bigger than their circumstances." "This is the best one yet, Mom," Arya whispered as guests filed in for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "That's because you helped design it," Morgan whispered back. "You've got your mom's eye for what matters." The crowd included employees from all 25 Meridian hotels, investors, local politicians, and media. But the people Morgan was most proud to have present were standing in the front row. Dorothy's daughter, representing the Chen family legacy. Gerald Robertson, the investor who'd believed in her first hotel. Bethany, now COO and Morgan's closest friend. And Aunt Ruth, beaming with pride in a new outfit Morgan had bought her. Notably absent, the Sterling family. Brandon had been invited. Morgan believed in closing all doors properly, but he declined politely, sending a note that said simply, "Congratulations on all you've built. You deserve every success. I'm not part of this story, and that's appropriate, Brandon." It was the most self-aware thing he'd ever written to her. Craig, on the other hand, had sent flowers and a graduation certificate. He'd finished his hospitality management degree and was now assistant manager at a small hotel in another state. His card read, "Thank you for showing me what real success looks like. Still working on becoming someone I'm proud of. Getting closer every day." Patricia had sent nothing. She'd moved to Florida to live with a cousin after losing her house and most of her social connections. Morgan occasionally saw her name pop up in social media comments, usually complaining about how young people didn't respect their elders anymore. Morgan always scrolled past without engaging. Some people learn. Some people don't. Morgan had made peace with the fact that Patricia fell firmly in the latter category. As Morgan approached the podium to give her speech, she looked out at the faces in the crowd. Staff members who'd been with her since the first hotel. New employees starting their journey. Young people from the neighborhood who'd been invited to see what was possible. Parents hoping their children might dare to dream. 7 years ago, Morgan began, I stood in the lobby of a hotel I owned, watching people who'd once dismissed me completely fail to recognize who I'd become. That moment went viral. People called it revenge. People called it karma. People called it justice. But I've had 2 years to think about what it actually was, and I've realized it was something simpler. It was proof. She paused, letting the words settle. Proof that when someone tells you you're not good enough, they're really revealing their own limitations, not yours. Proof that starting over isn't the end of your story, it's often the best chapter. Proof that the only approval you need is your own. And proof that the best life isn't built on proving others wrong, but on proving yourself right. Arya squeezed her mother's hand and Morgan squeezed back. This hotel, this company, these 25 properties across the country, they weren't built to show anyone what I could do. They were built because I knew I could do it. The fact that it surprised people who underestimated me is just a bonus. The real prize was always the building itself. The creating. The growing. The becoming. Morgan looked down at her notes, but she didn't need them. She knew what she wanted to say. We named this company Meridian because a meridian is a line that connects points across vast distances. We're connected, all of us in this room, all of our employees across the country, all of the guests we serve, by a simple belief. Every person deserves dignity. Every worker deserves respect. Every dream deserves a chance. We don't just believe that. We build on it. The crowd applauded, but Morgan wasn't finished. My daughter helped design the children's library here because she believes every kid should have a space to imagine their future. I believe that too. I was once a kid cleaning houses with my mother, imagining what it might be like to own beautiful spaces instead of just cleaning them. That imagination became this reality. But imagination alone doesn't build hotels. Work builds hotels. Sacrifice builds hotels. Showing up every day even when you're tired, even when people doubt you, even when the numbers don't add up and the odds look impossible, that builds hotels. Morgan felt emotion rising but kept her voice steady. 7 years ago, someone I trusted left me when I was at my lowest. His family told me I'd fail. They told me I was nothing. They told me I should accept my place and stop reaching for things beyond my station. And you know what I did? She paused for effect. I absolutely nothing they expected. I didn't fail. I didn't accept limits they tried to impose. I didn't stay small to make them comfortable. Instead, I built something they couldn't diminish because it was real, it was mine, and it was rooted in values they didn't understand: hard work, fair treatment, and authentic relationships. The applause was louder now, some people standing. Morgan gestured for quiet. The happy ending isn't that I got revenge. The happy ending is that I got free. Free from caring what people who don't matter think about me. Free from needing validation from people who don't know my value. Free from the limitations others tried to place on my life. And in that freedom, I built something extraordinary: not just hotels, but a life I'm proud of, a daughter who sees what's possible, and a legacy that says clearly, don't let anyone else write your story. You're the author. Make it good. She stepped back from the podium and took Aria's hand. Together they cut the ribbon on the Meridian crest. Cameras flashed. People cheered. And Morgan felt something she'd been chasing for years finally settle into place. Complete peace. Not because she'd proven the Sterling family wrong. Not because her success was public and celebrated. Not because her ex-husband now lived in a studio apartment while she owned 25 hotels. But because she'd kept her promise to herself 7 years ago when she'd signed those divorce papers through her tears. She would build something real. She would be okay. She would show her daughter that women don't need rescuing, they need support, opportunity, and their own determination. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and music played, Gerald approached Morgan with his usual warm smile. At 73 he still moved with energy and purpose. You've done it, Morgan, he said, hugging her. Everything we talked about 8 years ago. Everything you showed me in that 5-minute pitch at the conference. You didn't just meet the vision, you exceeded it. Because you believed in me when nobody else did, Morgan said. You gave me a chance based on nothing but a business plan and determination. I gave you capital, Gerald corrected gently. You gave yourself the chance. You did the work. You made the sacrifices. You built the reputation. I just provided some money and watched you do something remarkable with it. He paused, then added, your ex-husband has reached out to me a few times. Asking for advice. Asking about you. Asking if there's any way to, I don't know, make amends, I guess. And what did you tell him? Morgan asked, though she wasn't sure she cared. I told him the same thing I tell every entrepreneur who asks me for help. Nobody builds your life but you. If you want redemption, build something redeemable. If you want respect, do respectable things. And if you want forgiveness from someone you hurt, understand that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means the hurt doesn't control the other person anymore. Wise words, Morgan said. Did he understand them? I don't know, Gerald admitted. But he's trying in his way. He won't ever be what you needed him to be. But he might become something useful to someone else someday. That's the best we can hope for people who start late. Good for him, Morgan said, and she meant it without irony. Everyone deserves the chance to become better. But his journey isn't my responsibility. It never was. Bethany approached with Aria in tow. Boss, we've got journalists asking for interviews. The local paper wants a photo with you and your aunt. And someone from the mayor's office is here with a proclamation naming today, Morgan Taylor Day in the city. Morgan laughed. They're naming a day after me in the city that told me I'd never amount to anything? That's poetic. That's victory, Bethany corrected. Take it. You earned it. As Morgan moved through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, she caught sight of someone unexpected near the back of the room. A woman in her early 50s, well-dressed but not ostentatious, watching the proceedings with a sad smile. It took Morgan a moment to recognize her. Brandon's aunt, the one family member who'd been kind to her during the marriage. Aunt Helen. Morgan excused herself and made her way through the crowd. Aunt Helen? The woman's eyes filled with tears. Morgan. You look magnificent. Everything you've built, it's extraordinary. What are you doing here? Morgan asked, not unkindly. I had to see it for myself, Helen said. I had to see what you became after my family tried to destroy you. I'm so sorry, Morgan. For not standing up for you. For not telling Patricia she was wrong. For not helping when you needed it. I was a coward. You were in a difficult position, Morgan said. Family loyalty is complicated. It's not loyalty if it supports cruelty, Helen said firmly. I should have helped you. I should have told Brandon he was making a mistake. I should have told my sister that her behavior was unacceptable. But I didn't, and I've regretted it every day since. Morgan studied the older woman, seeing genuine remorse. What happened to your family, Helen? Patricia is alone and bitter in Florida. Brandon is trying, I think, but it's too late for most things. Craig is actually doing well, really well. He's genuinely changed. Nicole is engaged to someone who doesn't care about the sterling name, and that's probably the best thing for her. And me? I'm retired, volunteering with organizations that help women escape bad situations, trying to make up for the times I stood silent when I should have spoken up. That's good work, Morgan said. Important work. It doesn't make up for failing you, Helen said. But it's what I can do now. Morgan placed a hand on Helen's arm. The best apology is changed behavior. If you're helping other women, you're doing more than apologizing, you're making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. That matters. Helen hugged Morgan, and Morgan let her, feeling the older woman's shoulders shake with quiet tears. When Helen pulled back, she said, "Your daughter is beautiful. She has your strength. I can see it in how she carries herself." "She's everything I hoped she'd be," Morgan agreed. "Everything Brandon missed out on knowing." "His greatest regret," Helen confirmed. "He talks about her sometimes. Wonders if she looks like him, acts like him, if she ever asks about him. I tell him the truth, she doesn't need to. She has you, and you're more than enough." "Thank you for that," Morgan said. "And thank you for coming today. It means something that you're here." As Helen left, Morgan realized that healing wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a conversation with someone who'd been complicit, finding the courage to apologize and do better. Sometimes it was accepting that apology without requiring more than honest accountability. Sometimes healing was just letting go of anger because carrying it no longer served any purpose. The party continued for hours. Staff members shared stories about how working for Meridian had changed their lives. Several employees announced they'd saved enough to start their own businesses, using knowledge they'd gained from Morgan's mentorship programs. One housekeeper, a single mother of 3, announced she'd been accepted to business school with a scholarship Morgan's foundation provided. "I'm going to build hotels just like you," the woman said, tears streaming down her face. "Because you showed me it's possible." "Then I'll be your first investor," Morgan promised. "When you're ready." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Arya tugged on Morgan's hand. "Mom, can we go up to the roof? I want to see the view." They took the private elevator to the rooftop garden, a space Arya had insisted the hotel include for guests who needed quiet, nature, and perspective. The city spread out below them, lights twinkling in the darkness. "Mom," Arya said, "do you think my biological father saw the news about today?" It was the first time in months that Arya had mentioned Brandon. Morgan chose her words carefully. "He might have. But even if he did, it doesn't change anything about your life or who you are." "I know," Arya said. "I don't really think about him much. But sometimes I wonder if he knows how awesome you are. If he regrets leaving us." "He probably does," Morgan said honestly. "But his regret doesn't define us. His absence doesn't diminish us. We've built a beautiful life without him, and that life is complete as it is." "Because we have each other," Arya said. "Because we have each other," Morgan confirmed. "And because we know our worth doesn't depend on anyone else acknowledging it. We're valuable because we're us. Because we work hard, treat people well, and keep building even when things are difficult." "Like this hotel," Arya said. "You built it even though people said you couldn't." "Exactly like this hotel," Morgan agreed. "And you'll build things too, baby. Whatever you dream of, whatever you imagine, you'll build it. Because you're my daughter, and I've shown you that building is possible." They stood together on the rooftop, mother and daughter, looking out at a city that had once told Morgan she wasn't good enough. Now that same city had a day named after her, a hotel bearing her company's name, and hundreds of employees who'd found dignity and opportunity through her vision. Morgan thought about Brandon in his studio apartment, possibly seeing news coverage of this opening. She thought about Patricia in Florida, probably bitter about how things had turned out. She thought about Craig, genuinely changing and building something real. She thought about Simone, starting over and discovering who she could be without a sterling last name. All of them living with consequences and choices. But Morgan wasn't part of their story anymore. She was writing her own, and it was a story about rising, building, and thriving. Not despite rejection, but because rejection had freed her to become who she was always meant to be. As they headed back downstairs, Arya said, "Mom? When I grow up and build my own things, will you help me like Uncle Gerald helped you?" "Always," Morgan promised. "But I'll also make sure you know how to do it yourself. Because that's the real gift, not someone doing it for you, but someone believing in you enough to let you figure it out with support instead of control." "You're the best mom ever," Arya said. "You're the best daughter ever," Morgan replied. "And together we're unstoppable." That night, after dropping Arya off with Aunt Ruth for a sleepover, Morgan returned to her own apartment and sat in her favorite chair with a cup of tea. Her phone was full of messages: congratulations, interview requests, business opportunities, and one message that surprised her. It was from Craig. "I watched the live stream. Your speech was incredible. You taught me something I'll never forget. The best revenge isn't hurting people who hurt you. It's becoming so complete in yourself that their opinions become irrelevant. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like, Craig." Morgan typed a response: "Keep building, Craig. Real recognizes real, and you're finally becoming real. That's worth celebrating." She sent it and set her phone down, feeling the satisfying weight of a day well spent, a mission accomplished, a life well lived. The happy ending wasn't revenge. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't even success, though success was sweet. The happy ending was peace, freedom, self-knowledge. The understanding that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her, abandonment, poverty, humiliation, and transformed it into the best thing. Purpose, prosperity, and proof that she was exactly who she'd always believed she could be. Morgan Taylor, CEO and founder of the Meridian hotel chain. Mother. Met her. Self-made success. Living proof that some people don't just survive betrayal, they use it as fuel to build something extraordinary. And as she sat in her beautiful apartment, tea cooling in her hand, Morgan smiled. Because she'd won. Not by destroying the people who'd hurt her, but by becoming someone they could never touch, diminish, or define. She'd won by being free. And freedom, she'd learned, was the sweetest victory of all.